We have fewer democracies in the world today than we did 15 years ago. Fewer. Not more, fewer.
You know what? I'm about to say it.
Say it.
I don't care that you broke your elbow.
Not more, fewer.
Now, I say this with respect, with all the respect I can muster. But my advice to the president is this. Mr. President, you just got to try harder not to suck.
Not more, fewer.
You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Billy D's. If this is your first time here, first of all, thank you so much for finding us. Just to let you know, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. We've had a couple of really awesome interviews recently with some authors, and feel free to go back through our playlist and check those out. You can find the Billy D's podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. All of your favorite podcast platforms should have us. But if you have any issues about that, you can find out more about the Billy D's podcast on Twitter. Real easy to find on Twitter at Billy D's, and also Facebook, the Billy D's podcast, and YouTube. What we are going to talk about today, there's a couple of different things. We're going to talk about this horrible situation with Alec Baldwin and this accident that happened on a movie set that he was working on, in which one person was killed and another person was injured with the use of some sort of a prop firearm. And we're going to talk about that. And I want to be clear, when I talk about this, this isn't going to be critical of Alec Baldwin. There's been a lot of hate directed at him from his political foes, so to speak. And there's also been people running to his defense because they like his political stances or his ability to act or what have you. And we simply have to wait for the investigation to take place. Exactly what happened here, who all was involved, whose responsibility was it to, and obviously on a movie set, there's people who take care of specialized special effects props and things like that. And we're going to discuss that a little bit. But we're not going to get into who's to blame specifically in this given case because the facts simply have not come out yet through a proper investigation. Now, I know there's people, and they've already presented themselves to me, point out that Alec Baldwin has passed a judgment on social media of certain events. And that may well be the case. I do not know. But I can tell you that it doesn't matter to me if he has. That's not something we do here. So getting back to, if you're new to the program, I am not ideologically driven. Okay. I don't judge things based upon who's involved. To me, a given action is either right or it's wrong. It doesn't matter who's doing it or who's the victim. Are these people, are they the people I agree with? Are these the people I don't like? That doesn't factor in. A given action is either right or wrong. Okay. And that given action is either right or wrong, regardless of the people involved, what their political affiliation is, or what they've done online in the past. This argument, well, whataboutisms, those are things that drive me crazy. Okay. If I murder someone, my defense can't be, well, what about Ted Bundy? How many people did he kill? That doesn't justify my action. And whataboutisms are currently widely used by both sides of the political aisle, the ideological divide, and it's not something that we do here. Also today, we are going to talk about the role of digital media and how accessible it is by more and more people. And digital media isn't necessarily social media. For example, a video is a video. It isn't necessarily part of social media, although it can be. And it very often is interwoven into social media because people use social media to promote their digital media. And we do that here, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's becoming a wider and wider field. And what role that does this play in how events like the Alec Baldwin situation are being analyzed? We're going to talk about that a little bit, and I'm going to try to go some places that you might not expect with that. Okay. And while we're on the subject of anything associated with social media, we're also going to talk about, just very briefly, Facebook and a possible new social media platform from a certain former president. All that is heading your way. In regard to the Alec Baldwin tragedy, it's probably the best way to describe it. I don't know how this happened. We're going to talk about it a little bit. On the movie set of Rust, which was a movie that it was in production in New Mexico, apparently a firearm discharged on the set. Director of photography Helena Hutchins, who was 42 years old, was transported to the hospital via helicopter and subsequently pronounced dead by medical personnel. Also, director Joel Souza, 48 years old, was transported to the hospital by ambulance, and his condition is apparently not been released in detail, but I've heard that there was a wound to the shoulder. We have an edited portion of the 911 call for you right here.
Bonanza Creek Ranch has had 2 people accidentally shot on a movie set by a prop gun. We need help immediately. Okay. Bonanza Creek Ranch. Come on.
Stay on the phone with me. We're going to get some help, okay?
Director and our camerawoman has been shot.
So was it loaded with a real bullet or one?
I cannot tell you that.
Okay.
We have 2 injuries from a movie gun shot.
A movie gun shot, as it was stated there. Now, I'm not an expert on firearms. I am experienced, however. I've been trained and so forth. And I also have some experience with blanks in regard to documentary filmmaking for Civil War reenactments. So I know a little bit, and I can tell you the vast majority of the banter that I am hearing on social media and other places is very ill-conceived. All right. First of all, in regard to how a gun fires, and I'm going to talk about this because it relates to how a blank works. When a gun fires, it's kind of a misconception that gunpowder explodes and the explosion drives the bullet out. That's not exactly correct. A classic explosion, so to speak, would blow the gun apart. Okay. When a round is fired, the gunpowder has a chemical reaction and it burns extremely quickly, and it rapidly expands a gas, which then discharges the bullet out the barrel. Okay. And a blank works in a similar fashion. Okay, now you're talking about a charge that's probably only a fraction of what the charge would be in a live round. Let's say 25% of the normal power in a blank is what is used. However, that expansion works the same way, and that blast, so to speak, is blown out the barrel. Now, I would guess in some blanks used for movies and so forth, they might use a different composition to make the flash brighter for the camera and things like that. But the overall chemical reaction is the same. There's a blast coming out of that barrel. And the reason that I'm talking about this is it's a big misconception that a blank is harmless. Okay. The blast coming out of that barrel, that force that's coming out of there, will easily break skin. And depending on the size of the round and the type of weapon that's being depicted, it could easily penetrate your body. Okay. And for this reason, there are protocols in terms of how even blanks are managed on a set. Now, some of you might remember the Brandon Lee incident. This was a number of years ago, and this was with the son of the famous Bruce Lee. He was killed on set with a blank. And my understanding of that is that there was a fragment of one of the other blanks that was still in the barrel. And that was a projectile, which then killed him. So given the potential danger for that, because of the fact you have a very violent, rapid expansion of gas coming through that barrel, any type of debris is coming out of there extremely fast and could be harmful. And there's also hot particles from the gunpowder coming out of there. There's particles from the packing and other things that come out of that barrel. So very rarely is a blank fired directly at someone. What happens a lot of times is there's a little illusion with the camera angles. And there's a lot of times when a clear plexiglass type shield that the camera doesn't notice, obviously, is put in front of the actor that's being fired upon. So that blast does not harm them. So with all of this being said, I'm really unclear as to what happened here. And that's why I say we have to have an investigation. The protocols usually, from what I understand, listening to some of my friends who are involved in these types of special effects, because of the fact that they're trying to capture a moment, typically what happens is a prop gun is given to the actor. This prop gun does not fire, but it appears as a real weapon. So when he's running or if he's involved in a fist fight or something like that, he's got this prop gun that can't fire. But when that moment comes up where he takes aim and fires, there's usually a quick camera change, a different camera setup. And what happens is an expert who's with the props or who's handling firearms then puts in the hands of the actor a firearm that will fire a blank. And for all purposes considered here, that firearm is a real gun. Okay, it fires that blank with the same mechanism that it handles a live round. And that's why it's very important to manage safety in this situation. Now, with all of that being said, when I talk about this situation with Alec Baldwin, I want to be very clear that we don't know specifically what happened in this instance. Okay, we have to wait for the investigation to bear out the details, and then we can analyze it. And hopefully the right people will make the proper decisions to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I got to say, this is really a bizarre situation. Now, I've heard some reports, and I don't know if they're true, but they seem to be coming from legitimate sources, that there may have been a live round in that gun. So my first question would be in analyzing, let's say, a situation of this type, being very clear to separate ourselves from this specific situation, would be, if this is true, how in the world did a live round make it on to the set? You would have to presume that this live round was somehow mixed in with the blanks, or how did it even end up anywhere near this situation? There should have been live rounds nowhere on this set. Okay. And then the second question I would have would be the handling and the preparation of the weapon prior to the incident. Were the protocols followed? Was the gun properly examined? And was there proper instruction given to the actor? And then the next question that I would have in a situation of this type is, why would a gun firing blanks, and blanks being as dangerous as they are, Why would a gun firing blanks be pointed at someone off camera? You know, it's dangerous enough to produce the illusion with an actor that's on camera getting shot. Why would this gun be pointed in the direction of camera personnel or lighting personnel or workers of any kind? Why would anyone be standing in the path of this blast? Was there something wrong with the direction of what? Did the actor follow the proper procedures? Under what conditions was this discharge done? Those would be the questions that I would answer in this type of that I would want answered in this type of situation. Now, again, I'm going to say this one more time. I feel that the mean-spirited stuff heading toward Alec Baldwin is not right. That should not be happening, and I don't care how it's being justified. I don't care what his political views are or how he may or may not have behaved himself online in other public situations that have gotten a lot of attention. We should be handling that better. And we also have to be aware that all this political sniping, using this incident where someone died, okay, there's humanity involved here. Someone was injured. There's death and pain involved in this situation. And in no way should this incident be used as a political talking point or some way to throw things out there to make some sort of a bizarre point before the facts are even known. So we have nothing but respect for the situation. We have nothing but respect for the victims in this situation, for the people who have been injured and the family of that person killed. And quite frankly, we should be holding off judgment in terms of anything involving any particular person on the set. That includes Alec Baldwin and everyone else involved. I've already heard people blaming the prop masters and all these people. We just simply do not know. The facts are going to have to bear themselves out.
You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
Waiting for the facts to come out. That's not something that we have a whole lot of patience for these days. And that brings us into our wider topic for today, which is the fact that digital media, and when I say that, I can mean podcasts, I can mean videos, and very closely tied into that now is social media, which isn't necessarily sometimes supported by any type of digital media per se, because these people are becoming celebrities on a given social media platform of their choice. You can have someone that's on a social media platform and they have potentially millions of followers. And because of that presence on social media and because of that enormous following, they have an implied credibility. And because of that, their enormous following uses them as a de facto news source. So how did we get here? How did we arrive at this? I don't know that I have a definite answer, but I can tell you what my experience has been. I started in this business many, many moons ago. Okay, I've been producing professional quality media for over 3 decades. And back in those early days, there was 2 hurdles that are not there now in terms of becoming a media source on what was then broadcast radio and television. The first one was, if you were going to produce it yourself, the margin of quality between consumer grade cameras and other things to that of professional grade cameras, microphones, etc., that gap was enormous. Okay, so there was a barrier there. There was also a barrier to knowledge. Okay, the difference between, here again, consumer grade equipment and professional grade equipment, there was a huge learning curve to graduate up into professional recording media. Now, with that being said, it's probably true that the vast majority of digital media that I hear, podcasts and so on and so forth, are still nowhere near broadcast quality. Okay, as a matter of fact, most most program directors would never consider the vast majority of podcasts that are out there to ever be aired on their station. But with that being said, there's, let's say, a certain percentage that is also very good. There are some really, really good podcasters out there, some of which are probably better than a lot of people who are on broadcast media. But this is the second issue now. It used to be that only those really good people had access to radio and television. And now that radio and television is only part of the picture with what's going on now online. Everybody has access. So you have people with, let's say, a smartphone and an app. They don't even need a computer to create digital media now. They can do everything right on their smartphone, and they have access to the same platforms that media creators who have spent enormous amount of money producing a studio and all these other things. They both have equal access. And it's getting so that the training involved, communication skills, all of those things now are not being vetted like they were 30 years ago. So you have people coming to the table with no real working experience, either in terms of what they're doing with the technology itself. And granted, a lot of it takes care of itself now. I mean, you basically hit play or record or whatever, and the device in your hand takes care of all the hard work, right? So you have people now, in terms of content, really don't have a background for any of the things that they're talking about, really don't have any training, any type of understanding of public information and what the parameters of that are. But they, for whatever reason, whether it be their personality, their looks, or some kind of a hook that they have millions of people following them. And this device that's in your hand that has this person with this enormous following has this implied credibility that broadcasters had 30 years ago. But the fact of the matter is there's not a filter. There's not a program director. There's not somebody who's holding you accountable for the things that you are telling the public. And it's not a matter of restricting free speech. This is a completely different thing. Free speech really isn't a part of this discussion. It's a matter of having the responsibility, feeling that responsibility to properly inform your audience. Who is holding people accountable now for that? And the fact of the matter is it's not there. So that puts the responsibility onto us. And quite frankly, that's scary to me too, because the audience 30 years ago is not the same as the audience today. The audience today wants instant gratification. To go through a bunch of facts and figures and analysis is boring. And that's why broadcast media now has changed. They've become essentially large-scale social media platforms in some cases to have a following that brings them ratings. In some cases, it's clicks when it's online. In terms of broadcast, it's ratings, right? But it's the same thing. It's the idea we have to have this following. This following is what pays our bills. So to bother the audience with a bunch of boring facts and figures just simply is not profitable, especially when, and it's because the audience doesn't respond to that. They want their decisions, they want their opinions that they have already made to be reinforced. And that brings us back to this Alec Baldwin situation. The facts be damned. All they know is they hate Alec Baldwin because he didn't like Trump or whatever. So we're going to put him in the most mean-spirited bad light as we can at every opportunity. And this is at the expense of the humanity that is Alec Baldwin. This is at the expense of the humanity of the people who were killed and injured on the set. None of that matters. All that matters is we make our point and we feel good about our opinion. And that's what we want reinforced from our media now. It's not just social media. It's not just digital media. It's not just broadcast media. It's all those things. We only pay attention to things that reinforce what we have already decided. And that, my friends, is just not a good thing. To kind of close out this discussion on social media, there's been a couple of things announced here in the past few weeks that are kind of interesting. For one thing, Facebook is planning a major overhaul of itself. And in my opinion, this is probably coming from, we were talking about credibility. They've not only had an issue with the users on Facebook, but Facebook itself has had, over the past number of years, some public relations disasters. And there was the whistleblower who was on 60 Minutes not too long ago. So they have this. And they also have, even though for now they have a monopoly on their type of format of social media, that's typically not going to last forever, even without all of the problems that they've had with public relations. These things typically, it's like the survival of the fittest. That's kind of a misnomer. Where survival comes from is in your ability to adapt to change. And these things run its course. So I'm kind of curious as to see what they're going to do, what they're going to call themselves, how they're going to reimagine themselves. But that's going to be an interesting thing that's going to come about here in the near future. The other thing is that Donald Trump, the Trump organization, has come up with an announcement that they're going to have a new social media platform, and it's going to be called Truth Social. And from what I understand, this is going to be modeled very much after Twitter, which was a format that he liked. And, these things always start kind of optimistically. Objectively, Donald Trump has an enormous following. And if they jump on it right away, my guess is that it will have an initial jump. It will have this initial springboard type thing where it will do very well. But long term, these things, a lot of factors play into it. There's been a couple of things come and go here recently. I believe Parler was one of them. So, and the talking points are good. There is a certain amount of a monopoly in the social media world, and it would probably be a good thing to have somebody shake it up. How this is going to be handled here again, how this is going to be managed, and how this is going to be formed. And in terms of some of the things that we talked about during this podcast, that's another thing entirely. And how well it's going to be adopted long term by the public is something right now that's just a wild card. So if you have an opinion about any of these things, if you have an opinion about Facebook, if you have an opinion about Truth Social, or any of the things that we talked about today, feel free to tweet me. And you can do that very easily on Twitter at Billy D's. You just have to be nice now. I always say that. It's okay to disagree. You just have to be nice. And speaking of Twitter, if you go to my Twitter bio, there's links to just about every place I am located online. And feel free to check out our podcast anywhere that you find it, and our presence on social media anywhere that you find it. I am Billy Dees. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today, and we will talk to you again next week. Well, hello, everyone. I am Billy Dees from the self-titled Billy Dees podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy Dees. I am Billy Dees. I'd love to have you listen in.